and large. Oscar looking for Babbitt. First Kobira. Here we go. Babbitt! Are you kidding me?
Kobira took the good side. It looked like he had position, and Jeff Babbitt just said, "It doesn't matter where you go. I'm going to go up and I'm going to pull this thing down." Holy smokes. Jeff Babbitt putting on his...
Welcome back. It's Swing Pass. We've officially reached the midway point of the 2023 regular season. Week 7 had a loaded 13-game slate, starting off on Friday night with Atlanta taking care of business in Boston, 21-15 on the road, setting up their massive matchup in New York against the Empire for Saturday's game of the week. Elsewhere on Friday night, Carolina winning 27-19 over Dallas. Salt Lake getting their first ever win in their huge West Division showdown in Colorado against the Summit, winning 19-18, winning for the first time in 4 matchups against the Summit going back to the beginning of last season. They improved to 7-0, sitting sole possession of first place out in West. Just a big win for that Shred organization. LA handles their set of business in Portland on Friday night, 29-11 on the road. And then on Saturday's loaded slate, Philadelphia extends their winning streak to 3 games, winning 27-23 in Toronto. Another big performance from big game James Pollard. Indianapolis wins out over Chicago. For the second time this season, they extend their winning streak to 4 games, improved to 4-2 with a 26-17 win at home. They sit in second place, just a game back of Minnesota, who won after a vicious second half rally from the visiting Madison Radicals. Madison could not pull out the win on the road. They slipped to 1-4. Winchell improved to 5-1, sitting sole possession of first place in a wild Central Division. Carolina squaring off in Austin against the Soul. The Soul winning this matchup last season, kind of launching their playoff berth, but not so fast this year. Huge night from Alex Davis. 9 goals, showing off the speed all game long. And the Flyers get a huge road win, 22-20, improved to 6-3 on the season, go 2-0 this weekend after falling in Philadelphia last weekend. Flyers moving up into second place in the South, just behind Atlanta, who had a really solid game in New York, but the Empire reminding everyone once again and again why they are the champions, holding on for a 20-17, basically wire-to-wire victory for the Empire. They improved to 7-0, 25 straight home wins dating back to 2018, 22 straight overall wins dating back to the beginning of last season. The Empire are exactly who we think they are. They are champions, and it is up to somebody else in this league to disrupt them from their throne. Oakland gets a 21-17 win over the Growlers, improving to 4-3, bouncing back after their 0-2 road trip to Salt Lake in Colorado in week 6 last weekend. Spiders now jockeying with LA for that third spot out in the West after the Aviators get their second win of the weekend, 25-23 over Seattle. The Cascades once again just making so many highlight plays, but coming up just shy of the W. Big win for the Aviators again as they go 2-0 on the weekend. They improved to 4-3, sit in a virtual tie with Oakland for that third and final spot out West. What else do we have? 2 last games, Sunday's games. They just took place before we started recording this episode. Boston bouncing back after Friday night's loss, going up to Montreal, getting their second road win of the season. Boston now 2-0 on the road after not having won a road game before in their franchise's history. Just a little kooky of a season so far from the Glory as they improved to 4-2, still hanging on to second place out in the East. Pittsburgh, after falling behind early to the winless Detroit Mechanix, they rally at home, win 20-18. They improved to 3-3, hanging on to third place in the Central Division. Daniel, here we sit at the midway mark. I feel like I have a pretty good sense of this amount of the league. And then there's like this much that just gets tossed into question right now, right? Like you think you have some idea of who's on top and who's who's where. New York, of course, they're up here. They're going to always be up here. But now all of a sudden out west, Salt Lake asserting themselves as possibly the dominant force in that division. Minnesota clawing out these close victories. But it is taking a little bit of luck, it feels like it sometimes, for them to cling to this 5-1 record. Mm-hmm. Where are you at after all this?
Yeah, well, first of all, great recap of all those games. It's another super chunky slate of games. It's a lot to get through, but you nailed it.
I'm looking forward to just like a regular old-fashioned 10-game weekend.
10 games, yeah.
Just
you won't
nice,
be out of breath by the end
games.
of it. Yeah, so we are at the halfway point. It's always interesting because some teams have played, like Carolina's played 9 games so far. They're like almost done with their season, whereas the other teams have only played like 5 games. But yeah, I think we know we have a lot more information now than we did a few weeks ago, of course. And a lot of these top teams have been playing each other recently. But I will say that I pretty much know nothing as far as like who should be considered the favorite for any given division, except maybe New York. And that's kind of just by like default, right? And it's because they're the reigning champs. Like I still think DC is going to be right up there with them. But I do think we've narrowed down pretty significantly who are the relevant teams in the playoff race. Like I think we've gotten a lot more information about the West Division playoff race and specifically Oakland and LA competing for that 3 spot. And I think it's Boston and Philly competing for the 3 spot out east. And then, the South is as expected. Those 3 teams are kind of running the table there. And then the Central, it is as big a mess as it's ever been. So yes, we know some things. We don't know most things is a good way to put it.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about kind of the lay of the land, standings, playoff picture a little bit later in the episode, but we wanted to get to some game breakdowns, and we're going to start with that epic clash on Friday night, living up to all the hype. Salt Lake overcoming the Summit in Colorado, 19-18. Their best game as a franchise, in my opinion. They were just clicking on both lines. I love the pressure that they brought on defense. I love the offense with those new rookies, McKay Jorgensen and Will Selfridge, who did not play the Summit last year and look to add just a level of energy and playmaking on top of that already amazing foundation of the Shred O-line that we've talked so much about. It was just sort of a synthesis of all the things that I think have been coming to this culmination point for Salt Lake, right? Like, it's kind of one of those traditional sports struggles where a team keeps hitting the ceiling of a competitor that just keeps putting them in that little brother spot. And finally, you see on Friday night, there's sort of this eureka a little bit of what it will actually take to beat the Soul. And it was one of their best turnover performances ever. They were so good at knowing which shots to take and when to be aggressive and pressure a little bit versus when to just work it. I feel like they had so many good response drives, possession-based drives after Colorado would sort of throw one of their haymakers, nether cut deep as a receiver. Quinn Finer's going off. Alex Atkins is bringing his energy. The Summit are always going to be right there reminding you who they are. And yet it felt like the Shred, for the first time in their 4 meetings, had a response every single time for the Summit.
They have such a nice balance defensively speaking right now, whereas last year their D-line offense was just Chad Jorgensen launching the disc pretty much every time. So you were like, at best, this D-line will convert 40-50%. They were 9 for 9 against Colorado. And of course, some of those came after timeouts, but like that's a credit to the O-line for really punching in those breaks when they matter most. But like you mentioned Selfridge before, he was crossing over a good amount to play D-line. This was also without Grant Lindsley in this game. So I'm just like so impressed by the depth that Salt Lake has showed this year, specifically on that D-line. Like as good as the offense has been, we talk about them as like this well-oiled machine more often than not. It really is their D-line that kind of allowed them to build that lead against Colorado and just protect it through the end of the game. So I'm just super impressed with that team on both sides of the disc right now. Is it enough to push them past Colorado in the power rankings this week?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think they pretty securely...
So that puts them at 2 then?
Yeah.
You think so the Shredder is the second best team in the league after...
Yeah. I mean, look at how their offense is playing. Look at how many different varieties it can attack teams with. It can come at you through like a possession-based Jacob Miller attack. He was once again so good as their anchor point in that offense. Just knowing when to take those 1 to 2 huck looks that he likes per game. He had a big wind-up backhand that just floated to Jordan Kerr at a critical moment in the middle part of the game. He remains so good. Sean Cannell has become, I think, a little bit less explosive, but nevertheless, all as much significant to what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
Same with Luke Jorgensen. Their ability to sort of use their hyper skills for Cannell, that power for Jorgensen, his reset pivots. He's got one of the best pivot, catch, spread it to the opposite side of the field in the league right now. And they're just so good at using that crossfield ratchet to really expose the backside of defenses. Kerr does it with his lefty throws, but the whole offense is sort of designed to weave you one way and then ratchet really fast across the field the other way. Will Selfridge got involved. That sequence the layout.
Throw? No, the Kerr throw. That ridiculous.
Selfridge?
Yeah, the throw to Selfridge. It was reminiscent to me. To me, it was like when we saw Frood throw that perfect back corner shot to Quinn Finer, where he just threw his receiver open last year. That was like the same concept as this Kerr throw that we saw. Not to the same spot in the field, but the fact it was a Selfridge cut that was kind of towards the near side of the field. He was kind of lingering in that end zone space, but when Kerr got the disc, he just knew that he wanted to launch it to that crossfield space, and there's no better player in the league right now is hitting those throws, right? And it's always on his flick side. It's automatic, and it's so fun to watch.
But yeah, just kind of wrapping up, I think your point of comparing it to that Frood throw from last season that sort of rallied Colorado when they were behind in the third quarter to the shred in their first ever meeting. It very much felt that same sort of confidence throw, right? This is my spot. That's my guy. We're going for this. It might be kind of insane for most other players, most other teams in this kind of situation, in this sort of rivalry matchup. But we got that. We have that. And you can just feel that confidence for Salt Lake. I felt that for 4 quarters more than any other game that they've ever played against the Summit. And that kind of goes to show why they won, but they just started right away and they looked different. You could tell that they had a game plan. They were going to go out there and execute. I want to get back to what you were saying about the defense, because I thought that they did some fantastic matchups all night long. They put Tony Munga on Jonathan Nethercutt when he got switched back over to offense when Colorado was behind and they were looking for some secret sauce. He did a really good job using his size to frustrate Nethercutt. Obviously, Nethercutt got downfield, got that sky at one point. But other than that, I really felt like putting a little bit of size, making it more of a physical matchup for Nethercutt to navigate was a really good look for them. Johnny Hoffman was flying around on people, just creating havoc. Kyle Weinberg continues to be probably the most underrated defender in the league. He gets blocks, but they're kind of unsexy, and it's because he's so good at positioning and knowing how the rest of the defense kind of filters towards some of his matchups. He had a late game interception on kind of a bailout throw from Colorado's offense. And it wasn't anything super impressive, but he's big, he's fast, he puts himself in the right place, and he comes up with turnovers. And to your point, right now, they were 9-9 in that game, converting defensive break opportunities. If they're getting a turnover, they're putting it in. Weinberg becomes one of the most special pieces then, when he's, I think, still top 3 in the league in takeaways, and it's that thing of they lost a starting rotation of defensive players this last year, including who you and I kind of pegged as the runner-up for defensive player of the year last year in Joel Clutton. And Ben Green, who is one of the best takeaway artists.
Ben Green's going too.
And on and on. Garrett Martin, Taylor Barton, it was a list of all of their top block getters other than Kyle Weinberg. And here they are again, and they look better. They look like a better defense right now. It's nuts. Devin Terry is playing great. To your point about their counterattack, the rookie Everett Saunders, he has one fantastic hammer assist per game where he's just going crossfield to somebody wide open in transition. And it's just getting one kind of...
he's such a steadying presence for that D-line too. He's exactly what they were missing last year. I think Gene LaRue at times can also be that steadying handler, but he's also one to take shots too. I feel like Saunders has been kind of the rock for this D-line and probably their unsung hero so far. He's a rookie. Came out of nowhere.
Well, they've got 3 kind of Rookie of the Year candidates. There's Saunders on D-line, and then who I really wanted to kind of build up and talk about. Obviously, the veterans of this Salt Lake offense played fantastic. Kerr had a great game. Sean Cannell had a good game. Luke Jorgensen had a good game. Like, everyone had good games. But the X factors to me, and I saw it live, it popped out even more to me in watching film. Like, Will Selfridge and McKay Jorgensen aren't even a combined 40 years old, and they are going to be the reasons why, if this shred team takes a leap this year, it's going to be those two. Like, I love Grant Lindsey. I think his presence as like obviously a playmaker and like championship level contender is never going to be quite talked about enough with the addition right before the season to the Salt Lake franchise. But like long term, in terms of what they're trying to do in terms of developing their systems, it's these 2 teenagers, man. Like, they're just it. Like, they've got that look. McKay Jorgensen, for lacking some of the, I think, the flash that his older 2 brothers do.
He's like a vet.
He's you can't dispossess him of the disc. He just dominates in small little windows, and he has so much fun playing in them. Like, I don't know, he's maybe taken 3 hucks so far this year.
Yeah.
But he wants to give and go every single time. And again, to the thing of how the shred like to ratchet it across field, he's just a perfect piece for that. He's going to always look for that additional pass. It's like a really adept passer in the NBA who always knows to kick it one more to find that open shooter. He's like an oiler to their system. Like, he just makes everything so much fluid. And then Selfridge, my God, dude, like he had 2 throwaways, one of which was a greatest attempt that he almost got on a complete throwaway.
Was that one of his throwaways?
That was one of his throwaways, was a greatest attempt, which was just an awful, awful throw to him that he almost saved by flying 5 yards out of bounds. He makes that toe-in play on the Kerr throw. He's running around in the mid-space. On turns, he is picking up on like Cody Spicer and stuff. If the Salt Lake offense did turn it over, he's going and matching up against Colorado's best. Like, he just wants it. Every single point he's out there. This is a dude who has not taken a rep of college ultimate yet. Played 3 pro games last year. And he's competing with the best right now. Like, right here, right now. And I've joked about it, and like, friggin' Chuck Kindred kind of exposed me on the broadcast, and I was joking with Jordan Curran, like, Will Selfridge is your best player, but like, Will Selfridge might be their best player by the end of the season. Like, he's constant, man. He's apparently he's got this like regimen about his game. He's got timed warm-ups, timed cool downs. He's in the gym every day. He's just like about it, and you could see it in that matchup. Like, he was just an accelerator for them.
I just like that neither him nor McKay, and like while they are insistent and aggressive at times, neither of them play like they are the focal point of the O-line or like the offense at any given time. Like, it's still so much that they're like part of this bigger system, and like that balance of like still being a playmaker while you're operating in the shred system, as good as it's been as a whole. Like that to me is also what separates out like young players that can just slot in, play like vets, play like they've been there for years, and just like play their roles to perfection. I just think that's so rare.
Yeah. And to your point, the play that comes to mind is another like ratchet piece across the field. Will Selfridge gets the disc right in the goal line, and Elijah Jaime makes a streak cut to the back corner, draws 2 Colorado defenders, and then Sean Cannell just sneaks to the front cone. Selfridge just dishes it to him, but immediately points to Jaime like, that was you, bro. That was you.
Yeah.
You drew those defenders. And it's just, again, it's that mapping of the system of knowing exactly to wait a second, let the defenders pull, and then here comes the easiest pass of your life for an assist. Like, that's not always what the teenager does. Like, a lot of times they're trying to throw like a little coin slot throw to that back area.
Yeah, it's something risky. Like Selfridge's last throw was, I think that was kind of it was their last possession of the games. It was Salt Lake's, and he kind of forced one to the end zone when they could have run out the clock. But that's neither here nor there. He's still a young player, won't be mistake free, but yeah, definitely an exciting game for both those guys.
We should move on and let's get to the game of the week on Saturday night. I was really, really invested in that. And I know that it was kind of Empire holding out from the start to the finish once again. But I thought it was really interesting how Atlanta approached the game. They kind of stripped everything away in the first half. They were just possession-oriented drives. Sort of the opposite of how the Carolina and Austin game played out differently on Saturday night elsewhere in another battle between South Division top-end opponents. The Hustle were like doing these weave drives. Austin Taylor was the leading goal scorer at halftime because he just kept doing these like fill cuts at the front cone. Like Max Thorne was getting really involved as a distributor. It felt very much like a Christian Olsen motorized offense where it's just a lot of small, precise passes looking to just take advantage of New York's defense at the margins because you can't really go against New York full frontal right now in terms of engaging their defensive coverages. And so I really liked how the Hustle came at that approach. It was just once again a reminder of not only is New York the most talented team, not only are the deepest, not only do they have like 4 of the top 6 players in the league, they are the best at adapting. Because for as much as we've talked about like them not being efficient on offense and being a little bit grungier in how they approach this year, they're still excellent at pretty much everything, but their efficiency numbers are a little bit down. Then they go 8 of 8 on offensive holds in this game and do it by big boying to Jeff Babbitt and Ryan Osgar going off for 9 assists and getting into rhythm immediately in the first quarter. And it's just like, oh, right. Like, as soon as you think the Empire are this boring team settled only on execution, they start showing you why they can just go out and make plays all the time. And they only need 2 people at a time to do it sometimes. Like,
right. No, this was a show of force from New York is how it felt, especially with Atlanta like lacking some of those big like Huck statement plays that they were making in the playoff game in 2021. It was like
a little bit. They started to in the second
half.
A little bit. There's a Hellsmeyer Huck on yacht there, or a Sky on yacht. There was
right. But like they need those early. You know what I mean? Like they just let New York kind of get in rhythm early and then just stay. I mean that perfect first half that their offense played, that was basically the difference in the game, right? I mean, they were up how many goals at half? Like 3 or 4 goals at half. And then that was what they won by too. So yeah, just like letting Osgar get in rhythm immediately. And Babbitt like had he just had like statement play after statement play. Ben Yad also had 3 blocks in the game. Like
he flexed on someone after a Sky on a reset.
That was incredible. It was Kobira too, his former teammate, Mike Kobira, who played with the Empire.
That was one of the silliest things ever, Jeff Babbitt. Well,
I love that.
Let's set it up. So the first thing is that I think Atlanta, again, had like the right game plan approach, which was sort of doing these roller pulls to trap New York on a sideline, stunt the beginning of their offensive drives, like give them a little bit of like a sideways map to look at before they have to orient towards the end zone. Like, I got it. And also they were looking to flush New York receivers deep because one of the inefficiencies so far this season is that Empire haven't been great on their hucks. Like weather is a component in that. They've had some pretty brutal weather games, but if you look at the data, you would see
Oscar missed a game too.
Yep. So like their deep game by data accounts seem to be a little uncalibrated so far this season. So Atlanta thought to like put in these double team traps and then push people downfield. And in that sequence that we've been referring to, it's like, so New York kept developing this thing where instead of doing like a super dump, they would just bomb it to Babbitt on the opposite side of the field and just say, well, if you want to go jump with him, you can, but Babbitt's coming. That's not a 50-50 shot. That's a secure swing pass as a 40-yard hammer throw to a jump ball to Babbitt. So
which is a hard disc to catch for a lot of players. I mean, like that hanging hammer is not comfortable.
It's a hard throw, and New York has 4 different dudes. They had John Lithgow picking up and just bombing hammers to the opposite side. And
by the way, Lithgow becoming like one of the top players at picking up on that double team trap. I love that development this season. But like with as many good throwers and talent as the New York offense has, for them to use like pick the big 6'4" guy that has developed his throws the past 2 years and just let him go to work on the sideline. And I think he's like been such a consistent part of their team so far. But anyway, yeah, back to the Babbitt play.
It's fine. It's just, it describes a lot of detail because it's just so representative, I think, of how this New York team functions, where it's like Atlanta gives the game plan or implements a game plan that totally makes sense given what Empire's shown so far this season. And then Empire come out and are like, all right, you're going to double team trap us. We'll just hammer over the top to the opposite sideline to the biggest dude on the field every time. And then he's going to get the sky there, flex out your defender, roll up the sleeve, flex out the defender.
While he's clearing out of the space, just a
and
casual.
then clear out on a 50-yard outlet route, and then just get rewarded because you're trying to funnel downfield, and then he makes one of the best elevation grabs I've ever seen. Ryan Osgard talked about the post-game interview where he thought he overthrew Babbitt. He was like, oh, Jeff made a bad read. Oh, yeah. I'm never thinking Jeff makes bad reads again.
And that's the thing. Like Oscar had those games last year where like it was almost like he had situations where he realized that like, okay, it's Babbitt downfield. No one can jump with this guy. No one is going to like outread him or make a play on this disc than Jeff Babbitt. And that example was just like, I mean, it's probably why Jeff Babbitt is a leading MVP candidate at this point. One of the many reasons is that there are very few guys in this league that you just trust on like 100% of those shots. And that isn't even like how he scored most of his goals this year. It's been like the insistent, aggressive red zone cutting that he's really become known for this year. But to see he still has the same in-air ability that he always has had, and just like the momentum and like the mindset that creates and like resonates throughout that Empire squad, where their confidence is like through the roof in that first half. I just think he's such a tone setter, whether he's on offense or defense, making plays everywhere on the field.
I mean, his ground game right now, like his acceleration, like when he just decides he's going to start going, no one can match him right now. Like Brian Jones has talked about it on the broadcast. It's like, is there anyone right now that can stop this? Like, is there a single defender in this league?
I don't think so.
That can challenge this? He said maybe Cody Spicer, and we'll get to see that matchup in just a couple of weeks.
So though, like I think
I know.
physically gifted. So
it's also something that doesn't get talked about is that Babbitt's had some nagging injuries the past 2 seasons. Like he's been this all-world caliber player, and yet he hasn't been at this kind of health. And you can kind of see that at points on Saturday night where Atlanta's just starting to figure out someone for him. I think they tried like seven different defenders on him throughout the course of the game. Sure. And it's just like just throwing some kind of wetness on top of a raging bonfire to try and put it out. And he's just killing them in every variety of way. It's the front cone cuts. It's the skies. There's that one play where he just decided at midfield he was going to start sprinting downfield and just immediately created 10 yards of separation from his defender and was just in cruise control in the end zone before like half the defense figured out what was going on. It's just his speed right now. Like he's so healthy. He's so confident. I don't think we've seen this Babbitt in several years. And I think he's really taking it upon himself to remind people like, I'm different. Like there's nobody out here who can contain me right now. And he's been yelling it in half the games too. I mean, it's just a different level. It's a totally different level. And you can even see his own teammates just kind of taking a step back and being in awe of it a little bit. And I think it's just, again, indicative of where this New York team is at. They just have confidence everywhere right now. It's just oozing out of every pore of their team. I mean, Atlanta made good runs in that game. Again, I have a lot of respect for how the Hustle approached that game. They came with a possession mindset. They were going to earn back breaks where they could. Evan Lepler pointed out in the broadcast that it kind of felt a little bit like the DC playoff game last year, where it felt like New York had a sizable lead. It wasn't something that they were going to give up. And then DC just kind of started to trade out to their advantage a little bit in the second half and won it back into that game. Hustle did that almost. Like they didn't do anything sexy on offense. They kind of kept the disc. They didn't want to give too many break opportunities and allow New York's defense just to blow it open. And there was that stretch where that almost happened. It was like 15-10 New York. And it looked like Atlanta was going to start letting go of the rope. And then instead, they sort of rallied. And Justin Burnett made a couple of fantastic plays. Their defense started leveling up its intensity. They abandoned the zone look, started going to matchup defense. That worked really, really well for them. And they got back into that game kind of late. But, like, New York just closes, man. Like, they just know how to finish better than any team in the league, and kind of by a wide margin right now.
Yeah, and that's kind of what's separated them the past few years, right? And like, you look at 2019, all those wins were coming by like 4 goals or fewer. Like, that was kind of how they made their initial name for themselves as this like undefeated champion. And while there were definitely more blowouts in 2021, still, like, those games that were coming down to the wire, like against DC in the playoffs, yeah, like you said, it's like the ability that their stars have to hit that next gear and like know that they're just going to put the game away. Like, Ben Yot has moments like that pretty much in every single.
He did defensively a couple times.
Yeah,
he did
right.
A couple of blocks,
like big chase down blocks. Like, yeah, these guys just repeatedly rise to the occasion. Jack Williams, relatively quiet in this game, but like, obviously we've seen that from him playing this year. So it's just like, it's a guessing game. You don't know where it's going to come from in any given game against New York. Sometimes it's Babbitt, sometimes it's Oscar, Yot, Williams, whatever. But the fact they have so many options is just like, I don't know what any team can do against that.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of want to stay here like a moment longer, but we talk so much about New York. I kind of want to set them aside for a moment. We can get to them later. Let's talk about the big matchup in the South Division. Carolina winning 22-20 over Austin. Austin slipping now to 5-3. All 5 of their wins coming against interstate opponents from Dallas and Houston. They're now 0-3 against their prospective playoff opponents in Atlanta and Carolina. This is the second loss against the Flyers. And it's sort of confirmed what you and I have been talking about for a couple of weeks, which is that this Austin team is absolutely as talented as last year's version, but there's a difference. There's a difference of discipline and in offensive approach. Their defense is still really tenacious. I think that the Souls D-line ability this year has vastly exceeded their offense, but their offense, it's so talented. It has so many good playmakers, and yet they get into this frenetic space where they just feel like they need to do everything. Everyone's a shooter. Everyone can take downfield looks, and it leads to 22 turnovers at home against the Flyers and an L. You know, like, you're not going to lose this Flyers team playing the way that they're playing right now by committing 22 turnovers. And it's sort of been the story of the Soul so far, which is they're really talented. They're going to make a handful of amazing highlight plays in the game. And Swiatek and Kyle Henke should be on SportsCenter pretty much every week. And yet they're slipping a little bit behind the competitors that they were right neck and neck with last year.
It's interesting because you compare this game to the Carolina game they won last year, and I think Austin had maybe like 9 total turnovers in that game, maybe 10. They were still taking shots, but they were coming down with so many more of them in that first game. And just like, I think a lot of 50-50 shots went Austin's way, and you kind of felt that wasn't so sustainable, but they were connecting, and that's kind of what it comes down to. I want to say if Austin didn't take so many shots that they would just be a better team. But that is kind of why they beat Carolina the first time, right? Like, it was taking the shots and then connecting on them. So when they were doing the same thing in this game, but just kind of connecting on fewer of them, I don't know. I just think Carolina is so good at, I mean, they take their fair share of shots too, but they're so good at like resetting the disc and just playing super patient ultimate. And it's like that part of the game is where I don't think Austin really measures up to Austin or Carolina this year. Like, I just don't think we've seen enough consistency in like the patient possessions where you need to reset the disc 10 times. Like, Austin had a few miscommunications in the backfield with Duncan Fitzgerald and like Evan Swiatek or Jake Radak. And you just kind of generally feel this sense, like, if they're not really connecting on like the big plays, then they're not like a grinded out type of team, even though they show flashes of that. So it's kind of in that way that I feel like Carolina and Atlanta are much more likely to come out of the division right now than Austin.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to have a style available, a lineup available, a rotation available that can just get you those easy possession scores. I mean, again, that's what sort of was the difference this year in Salt Lake beating Colorado. They had the ability to go, all right, here's our calm down drive. We need to punch it in, respond here, and just stay trading out. And Austin, for all their ability, for all of the things that they show you, there's just way too many of those. backfield reset turnover, a huck that just shouldn't be taken at that point in the
Right.
game. You know, like
Right.
there's just a handful of those this season that frankly they weren't doing a year ago. And I don't know if that's Vinay Valsaraj missing from the starting lineup. I don't know if that's working in some of the new pieces. There's not really like a specific reason, I think, but it just feels like everything's gotten just a notch more up tempo, and that's leading to a few more mistakes. And those are the differences between these close games between the Hustle and the Flyers, who show an ability to kind of do the thing that championship weekend teams do, which is settle down and have a nice like sub 13 turnover game against their closest.
Right. Well, and to be fair, that is like newer for the Hustle to even be in that category of teams this year, because I think they were a lot more dependent on their success of like playing their optimal game by just shooting deep and connecting on those shots. Mm-hmm. Whereas, Austin just hasn't shown that same consistency. And I think that's something you see from all the best teams, right? Like New York and DC are very capable of this as well, where like, they have some guys that can go up and get the disc in the deep space, but they're so comfortable with these like slower, methodical possessions. And I think it's just like an overall comfort level thing, and maybe confidence too, that you don't quite see with Austin. It's like too many guys are just reliant on those big plays. Maybe not reliant, but it's like that's sort of like the mindset on this O-line.
It's a very yippee-ki-yay mindset, right? Like it's true Texas yeehaw sort of stuff. And there's a lot of tough boys on this Soul team, and it's just a little bit too much of that. Like there just needs to be a little bit more discipline, and I think Carolina is perfectly the team to remind them, you can't do this against teams of our caliber. And that's why the Flyers have represented this division at championship weekend. It's like they know when to take it down just a notch and just convert. And it feels like
this was also
they have to attach 50 bottle rockets into it and have Evan Swiatek like flying over the American flag as he like lays out and
so good.
Fireworks go off.
Like the amount of plays he's made this year, or like has almost made this year, it's too many to count.
He's on a different level, man. I've talked to you about this privately. He's missed like 3 different Sports Center level layups here, like by inches, and he's made a handful too. He's wild. He totally has a sense of just disc hawking that I think is almost becoming singular. Like he goes, man.
Yeah, I was going to say with Carolina, I think this is the first game this season that we saw like a pretty strict O-line that featured Yannick and Gu Johannes back together. And it's like they never left. It's just like reliable reset after reliable reset. Like Saul is still going to take those shots. And I think he had 5 or 6 throwaways. Like it's never so pretty from his side, but just having that rock that Gu Johannes has been for the Carolina Flyers, Austin hasn't really had that, and now it feels like they almost have a couple Jake Radaks, like with the Duncan Fitzgerald edition. They are both fantastic in the backfield, but I do think both are maybe a little bit too turnover prone at times to really be like the rock steadying forces for this O-line. Like that may be another missing component. It's just like who's the rock for that O-line? You could argue it's Swiatek, but he's still just like kind of a downfield playmaker at the same time.
It's too small.
Doesn't touch the disc enough.
No, I'm banking a bad Dwayne Rock Johnson joke.
No, I missed it. I'm sorry. We'll move on.
No, it's bad. Moving on. We'll cut that in post.
Yeah, that's not making it.
I want to get, so we're kind of talking about the negatives of Austin. I still think they played a good game. Let's get to the positives of Carolina. They're 6-3 right now. They've played like 8 different lineups in 9 games, but it's this Flyers team that, again, to your point earlier, they've played 9 games. We have more data about them. We feel, I think, more confident in Carolina over the past several seasons than almost anyone outside of like New York and DC, I would say. Like they're just kind of a known quality in a certain way and how they compete. And I think, again, they just show it to you this weekend. Like they kind of take one on the nose in Philly. They probably feel like they maybe should have won that game and closed out differently. And they sort of do it on the road this weekend. Like Dallas is nipping a little bit early. They put him in the dust in the back half of that game. Siraj Mataraju went off for 12 scores and like 800 yards on offense.
Very big
on offense. Then the next night, his best bud, Alex Davis, goes off for 9 goals. and just kind of stampedes over the soul and reminds them why he is who he is, scoring 50 goals last year. But this Carolina team, they have so many different pieces that they can attack you. If you mentioned the backfield of Yannick and MGH, I mean, AD is an amazing goal scorer. Suraj Madaraju has confidence now in offensive playmaking roles after getting a few reps earlier in the season. You see that early season experimentation playing off in some of these odder road travel lineup scenarios.
Yeah,
and then elsewhere you have Anders Jungst playing at full health again this year and just has, I think, added a depth to his throwing repertoire. He's got that tooly little scoober that he loves, especially in the red zone right now. That's such a nice piece for him because he's often ahead of his mark or his defenders. So he has kind of like a free throw for a second or two. So when he gets that like stall 0-2 look and he can just sort of find someone on the cross side, like that is great for their offense. Just another piece, another tool. Jacob Fairfax continues to be just a dog. Like he's one of my favorite players to watch week in, week out. There's just something that he does that's nice, and he just doesn't take anything from anyone. He's just one of those people who kind of goes out there and looks like he's having a bad time, but it's like obviously because he's just like in it. I like the Flyers. They ruined my 5-7 championship prediction, which I will never forgive them for.
But you're right.
I know. Yeah. I wanted the losing record showing up at championship weekend, man. But
could still happen in the Central. Hold out hope for the Central Division. Madison,
Minnesota's downfall. No, but you know, like Carolina, and you've talked about before, like they're just one of those teams where you look at how New York's playing and you go, Flyers are still kind of right there with them. Like they've got an ability to at least match the number of looks and presentations that a team like the Empire has for you. And they have a confidence in running through a variety of them. They're not going to get stumped. Right. And I think you could see that in Austin. Austin almost succeeded in making the Flyers play kind of that tempo, committing a few too many turnovers, you know, getting in a fast break really, really quickly. Like the Flyers got pushed into that space a little bit. They just have, you know, track athletes that can go run down a lot of those shots, but they can adapt so well. They can kind of figure out how to find themselves within the contours of whatever game they're playing. If it's a defensive struggle, they'll do that. If it's this wide open kind of hucking game, they'll do that. And I really like that about them, that they can just kind of take what comes at them, adapt to that end game, and then sort of finish you out at the end.
So this may be a good time to kind of expand into a greater conversation about the South Division playoff race right now. But when you look at Carolina, they've played 9 games. They have 3 games left. It's Dallas, and then it's back-to-back Atlanta games to close out the season. Does it worry you at all that it has been so many different iterations of O-lines, D-lines? Like, is that going to be a problem that they haven't really found something that, like obviously they found something that worked super well against DC when Joe White just took over, but like, is there going to be kind of some uncertainty heading into the playoffs when they have to take on Austin or Atlanta, where it's like, okay, they don't have like full confidence in any one like set of 7 O-liners, 7 D-liners, right? Like, is that a problem for them, do you think?
No. Because I think that, again, it goes back to their
you're of the mindset that like it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who they throw out there. Like it'll work out.
It's that belief. They know who they are. It doesn't kind of matter whatever mask or clothes or matchup that they're sort of presenting in. It's just sort of the ability to find their grooves within that and like work it. And I just like Carolina in that space. Like they've shown that they can kind of rotate a cast of players between a variety of roles. They can all succeed in those. But when the dust kind of settles, it does appear that like when they go back to the MGH Yannick backfield, that's what works for them. When they get Fairfax and AD out in the space, that's what works for them. Like, I think they have the absolute knowledge and sort of data at this point to like put forth their best rotations. I just don't think that they're too interested in it right now. I think they're too much in that development game space of figuring out how many different things they can do here. Because again, they added so much this offseason, and Liam Searles Bowes and Joe White and, Ben Snell and just, I think, look different from how they looked last year, especially with like Anders Jungst missing a majority of the season and
Right.
moving on from Alan Laviolette, who before he blew out his knee in 2022 and didn't play this year, he was an all AUDL player in 2021 when they won the title. This team's lone representative in the postseason awards. They haven't had Eric Taylor this year. It's sort of like you forget all of the different milieu that's going on with the Flyers because they're going to win 6 out of their first 9 games and take down 2 of their best opponents in the division and look really good on the road in Philly and beat DC on the road the night before, again.
Yeah. I guess I don't envy the decisions Mike DeNardis is going to have to make when like he has a healthy Eric Taylor. Like when they have their fully healthy lineup for the playoffs, I have no idea, like, if Joe White's going to play offense or defense, Eric Taylor offense. Like, it's kind of like when Nethercutt came back in 2019 for, like, that playoff game against Dallas, and it was a debate whether to even activate him or play him on the O-line, play him on the D-line. I actually forgot. I don't even think he played that game at all. Yeah, and then Dallas ended up winning. But it's like, I don't know, it's just, like, decisions like that when you don't have, like, your go-to consistent lineup kind of building into the postseason. To me, that just like raises some questions when you compare it to a team like Atlanta that I think is more or less set in how they've been running things all year. And it's just like more and more reps that all those guys have had together.
Atlanta's the example there? See, I think Atlanta would be the example that doesn't work because they've got these new pieces and Misha and Liam Haberfield, and some of these guys have missed a couple of weeks. Carl Ecklert's
but they
for a couple of games. Like
they kind of have their O-line and their D-line, and then they're comfortable playing Holzmeier and Ramsey on both sides. So
but that's what I mean. But if you include Holzmeier and Ramsey, then their offensive rotation potentially goes like 10 deep. I think that the Flyers have a much better sense of their identity and who they play with than this current version of Atlanta. I think that they're kind of equally talented. I would say that Carolina has a much more fundamental understanding of who they are than Atlanta. I think Atlanta's going through a fair amount of changes.
I think Carolina this year has had, you could probably point to 14 guys on their roster that have played like starting O-line points in games this season. Atlanta, I don't think you could do that. You could point to like 10 probably.
I'm gonna do it right now. We can keep talking.
Do it right now.
Get a lay of the land. Let's go lay of the land. We can talk about the general standings and playoff picture. We can bring back in the Central Division a bit to this. We can talk about the 3rd seed in the West Division as well between LA and Oakland. I got to crush you on this one.
Sure, go ahead.
So you should.
I'll look at Atlanta's roster if you want.
No, I'm looking at Atlanta's roster right now. So you got Austin Taylor, Bobby Lay, Christian Olsen, Matt Smith, Brett Halsmeyer, Liam Haberfield, Max Thorne, Dean Ramsey, Carl Eckwerschel, Misha Freystadter. Jeremy Langdon was playing a little bit of offense. Hayden Austin Nab has some stuff. We're getting up there, boy. We're getting up there.
But those last 2 names, those don't count as significant O-line minutes. Austin Nab and Jeremy Langdon. Those aren't like, I'm saying starting O-line minutes. You look at a guy like Ethan Bloodworth and Suraj Madaraju have played significant O-line points for the Flyers in at least one game this year. Like they had a game where they played their entire D-line on offense.
No, you're making this up now. Ethan Bloodworth has played 18 offensive points. Jeremy Langdon has played 24.
Okay, but look at the games. It was first game of the season. Bloodworth played.
I kind of hear your point, but you're arguing into a pit right now. Like the Jeremy Langdon has played more offense than Ethan Bloodworth in fewer games.
Okay, fine. Bloodworth, I was exaggerating slightly on. I guess he played 6 O points, 10 D points, then he had a 7 and 15 game. Anyway, I still think the Flyers have been experimenting a lot more with the D-line guys playing offense than Atlanta.
Okay, I'm not trying to say that they haven't been experimenting. I'm arguing a little bit more cosmically here. I'm saying that when the dust settles and like the Flyers just kind of rally around the wagon, like they know what their offensive is. I think they know what their offensive starting 7 is just slightly better than Atlanta does right now. Like I think that Atlanta is still working in so many pieces of the Haberfield. Is Holzmeier still going to be like starting offense by the end of the season? where does Misha fit in when he's fully
Haberfield's
healthy?
been offense every time he's played, hasn't he?
Yeah. I'm just saying that when they're fully healthy, they have like 8 or 9 potentially dudes that they can plug right in there. Where I think that the Flyers kind of know their 7 much more solidly. When again, like this is all.
Who are their 7? Tell me who Atlanta's 7 are.
Wait, Atlanta's or Carolina?
Or sorry, Carolina's. Give me Carolina's 7.
Fully healthy.
Fully healthy Eric Taylor too.
Yannick, no. I actually think Yannick is D-line now. All right, now I'm defeating my own argument. Yannick MDH, Joe White, Anders Jungs, AD, Fairfax, and Liam Searles-Bose.
I think Yannick is defense too. I think
I do think but like he is a natural D-line player. Like that's where he actually fits in best. That's where you want him shot taking. He's a great reset defender. He really gets into transition quickly. Again, and that's
Alex Davis. Did you put Alex Davis on offense? Elijah Long you put back on defense?
Oh yeah. I think now is the beginning of the year experiment as other things were going on, but I like Eli on defense.
We should do our line projections once the playoffs hit, and like once we see lineups, we should just like see how accurate we are with this.
Here's the lineup. We would lose this game by 12.
Yeah. We're Coach Daniel and Coach Adam take charge.
I'm gonna wear a propeller hat for that episode just to really set the vibe, really bump up my credentials. All right, now we got
derailed.
I know.
Yeah.
But it's a good derailment. I think it'll be entertaining, like in the way that
it's a good conversation.
Yeah, overturn in a ditch. So lay of the land. So we've got these kind of front runners in Salt Lake, New York, Minnesota, and Atlanta. Right now, it's the first place contenders in each of the divisions. I was struggling there because Atlanta just lost, and we were just talking a whole bunch about Carolina. I'm like, the Flyers are
right.
No, not quite yet. They still
Atlanta
like a game back. But those are the first place contenders. Second place relatively feels pretty stable in most of the divisions right now. In the West, you have Colorado, who still looks a little bit above the rest of the fray out there. Indy, I think, to what we were talking about going into this season, they've really stabilized. They know themselves. They're just kind of out executing these other Central teams that are going through a lot of personnel shifts, health issues, etc. Mm-hmm. In the East, you've got DC, who still figures to be one of the top 2, 3, 4 teams in the league.
But DC is technically in third right now.
I know they're technically third.
The record show the Boston Glory halfway through the season are in second place in the East. I just think it's funny.
They're a half game back of Boston. They've played one less game. They have the same number of losses. All due respect to Boston, they've been taking care of business. But it's one of those things where until they lose by 6 to Atlanta, it's just a little tough. But yeah, to your point, Boston is sitting in second place. I just am always going to think of DC as being, second in the East, given their rivalry with the Empire. In the South, you've got Carolina, who I think has now reestablished themselves firmly ahead of Austin after their setback in Week 6 in 2022. They've now won 3 in a row against the Soul. Those are the 4 divisions, but the third spot in each of the 4 divisions is, other than the South, is just kind of totally up for grabs. In the West right now, you have Oakland and LA both at 4-3. In the Central, you have Pittsburgh at 3-3 and Chicago at 2-3 right behind them. And then Madison at 1-4 is basically the most dangerous 1-4 team in the league right now. All 4 of their losses coming by 2 goals or less, most of them in the fourth quarter. They're a young team that can't catch a break, it seems, in almost any given week. But if they start getting back some of these veteran pieces and their strength of schedule just gets a slight bit easier down the stretch, I think they can make a push, especially again with both Pittsburgh and Chicago already having 3 losses. Madison only sits 1 loss behind them in the standings, so not too worried about them. In the East, you've got Philly now riding a 3-game winning streak at 3-4. You've got Boston at 4-2. Those 2 teams seem to be coming to an end of season clash. Obviously, Boston holds a head-to-head advantage after they came out from their huge come from behind victory at home a couple weeks ago. But Phoenix looked like they were making a joke this weekend after the win that they were the third best team in the league, and got to pump the brakes a little bit there, guys. But I think that they do have a point in terms of how they've been playing teams. Like, wins and losses still very much matter. But if you look at how the Phoenix have played, they've acquitted themselves very well. I'd still love to see a few more wins, but they are definitely a very strong contender in the East, and truly believe that they can still take down a DC or New York in the playoffs. What is your sense of kind of where things will shake out? Do you have a favorite amongst those bunches? Do you favor any of these teams? I feel so split on the third place race in basically every division right now.
The third seed is definitely tough. I think the first seed, like, I'm still not sold that Salt Lake is going to be the 1 seed over Colorado. Like, they do play again this Friday in Salt Lake, granted, so Salt Lake will have the home field advantage for that game. But yeah, like, the top of the divisions, I still have no idea in the South. It's going to come down to those last Atlanta and Carolina games to end their seasons, really, like, who is going to be where in the pecking order. And then in the Central, I'm not sold on Minnesota being the 1 seed either. I do think it's kind of between Minnesota and Indy in my mind right now. I would say for the 3 seed, I think Madison is a slightly better team right now than Chicago and than Pittsburgh. I just don't know if the math is going to work out where they can get enough wins. Like, the rest of Chicago's schedule, it's really not that bad. Like, it's hard to see them going worse than 7-5. Pittsburgh has had 2 Detroit games already. So, like, they've only had 1 quality win, let's call it, and it came against Madison literally on the final throw of the game. So, like, I'm not really sold on Pittsburgh being a serious contender for that 3rd seed either. I just think the Chicago we saw this past weekend in Indy kind of makes me doubt them a little bit more than I was before. And I just don't know what their lineups are going to look like week to week. So it's tough because I do think Madison, kind of like Philly, I think Philly is to me, they're the 3rd best team in the East, but I still don't know if they're going to get that 3 seed. And I think Madison is the 3rd best team in the Central, but again, don't know if they're going to get that 3 seed. So it'll be really interesting just to see how these wins and losses shake out down the stretch. I think you can have, the idea of the top 3 teams in mind, but it doesn't always get reflected in that same way when it comes to the playoff standings.
Absolutely. And Madison will get their revenge game as well. Potential rematch this coming Saturday in Madison against the Wind Chill as they get set to host them. So just kind of a lot of immediate rebound games after this week 7 slate of results. So it'll be really interesting to kind of continue this tension going into week 8. We'll start covering a little bit of some end of season, like mid-season award picks and stuff with Evan Lepler on the AUDL.com website. But that'll be wrapping it up here for this week 7 recap episode of Swing Pass. We thank you so much for tuning in as always. We'll be back in just a couple of days to preview another huge weekend of AUDL action going into week 8. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon. Bye now.